The Aveline Estate, 10 minutes before the speeches began. I am standing in the shadows of a silk tent that cost me $12,000. The air smells of expensive roses and cheap betrayal. My name is Janet Moore, and for 30 years, I tried to buy my family's love with silence and checks. Tonight, the balance comes due. They think I am the broken foundation holding them up, the quiet girl with the bad arm who just pays the bills. They do not understand that when you remove the checkbook, the whole house comes down. I am not here to ruin a wedding. I am here to close the account. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Here is what happened. The check on the table looked like a mistake. It wasn't. I stared at the numbers in the banking app on my phone, then back at the paper invoice sitting in the cold morning light. The sum was $120,000. It was enough to buy a small house in a bad neighborhood, or a very good car, or freedom. Instead, it was going to buy flowers that would die in 12 hours, and champagne that would give strangers a headache. I picked up my coffee mug. It was cheap ceramic, chipped at the rim, filled with lukewarm roast I'd made 3 hours ago. I held it with my left hand. My right hand doesn't grip things like that. It hasn't since I was born. My right arm ends just past the elbow in a taper that the doctors called a congenital anomaly, and my mother called God's little test. I adjusted the cuff of my sweater over it. It's a reflex. I don't feel shame about it anymore, just a pragmatic need to avoid the pause in people's eyes when they see it. The invoice was heavy. I could feel the weight of the paper stock. Heavy cream linen embossed lettering. My sister Clara didn't do things by halves. She wanted the fairy tale. And for the first time in 30 years, my family wanted me involved in writing it. It started 3 months ago. The silence that usually filled the space between Christmas and Thanksgiving suddenly broke. My mother called on a Tuesday just to ask about my day. My father sent me an article about structural engineering, my field, with a note that said, "Saw this and thought of you." It was terrifying. I am a senior structural engineer at a firm that rebuilds bridges. I understand load-bearing capacities. I understand tension and compression. I did not understand this sudden warmth. It felt like walking onto a frozen lake that looked solid but groaned underfoot. Then came the dinner. They invited me to the house, the big one on the hill that they couldn't really afford to maintain, but refused to sell. Clara was there, glowing, a diamond on her finger that caught the light every time she moved. She was tender. She touched my shoulder. She poured my wine. She didn't look at my arm. She looked at my face. "We're so proud of you, Janet," my mother had said, her voice trembling with an emotion that looked real. "You've built such a life. You're so independent." "The strong one," my father added. He cut his steak with precision. "You never needed us the way Clara did." I drank the wine. I wanted to believe them. That is the flaw in the design. You can reinforce the steel, you can pour the concrete, but if the foundation is porous, the structure fails. My hunger for them was the porosity. I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to be the daughter who was celebrated, not just the one who was tolerated because she didn't cause problems. Then came the pitch. It wasn't aggressive. It was framed as unity. Clara's fiancé, a man with a heavy jaw and a family name that opened doors but didn't pay bills, had liquidity issues. My parents' assets were tied up in the house and the market. "You don't have children to worry about," my mother said softly. "You have your savings. You've been so responsible." "This wedding will heal the family," Clara said. She reached across the table and took my left hand. Her palm was soft. Mine was calloused from site visits and drafting pencils. "I want you to be my maid of honor, Janet. But more than that, I want you to make this possible. I want us to do this together." I looked at them. I saw the desperation behind the smiles. They needed the money. But I saw something else too. An opening. A transaction. If I paid, I was in. If I paid, I wasn't the broken thing in the corner anymore. I was the patron. I was the savior. I won't write a blank check, I told them. My voice was steady. It's the voice I use when I tell a contractor his concrete mix is substandard. Of course not, my father said quickly. I'll open a dedicated wedding account, I said. I will deposit the funds there. I will be the signatory on the major vendor contracts. The venue, the catering, the production. I pay them directly, no cash handouts. They hesitated. I saw a flicker of annoyance in my father's eyes. He hates losing control of the ledger, but it vanished as quickly as it came. They agreed. They had to. Now sitting in my apartment, I logged into the new account. I authorized the first wire transfer, $30,000 to the Aveline estate. It was a deposit. I looked at the confirmation screen. There were fingerprints on this money. My fingerprints. It was money earned from 14-hour days on construction sites, from standing in freezing rain, inspecting rebar, from years of eating sandwiches at my desk while my colleagues went to happy hour. I had saved it because I knew the world wasn't going to catch me if I fell. I had to build my own safety net. Now I was cutting a hole in it to let my family in. I put the phone down and got dressed. I had a site meeting at the venue. The Aveline estate was 2 hours north, a sprawling vineyard overlooking the coast. It smelled of money. Not new money, which smells like plastic and ozone, but old money. It smelled of rotting roses, wet earth, and salt spray. The main house was a century-old stone mansion with ivy clawing up the walls. The lawn was manicured so precisely it looked like green felt. I met the planner there. Her name was Elise. She wore a headset and carried a clipboard like a shield. She looked at me, then at my arm, then back at my face. She didn't flinch. She was a professional. "You're the sister?" she asked. "I'm the contract holder," I said. She nodded. "Right, the money. We need to sign off on the tent rentals today. Clara wants the silk liner, not the standard polyester. It adds $4,000 to the budget." "Show me," I said. We walked through the gardens. A string quartet was practicing in the gazebo, playing scales that drifted on the wind. Waiters were polishing crystal glasses on long tables set up for a distinct event. The sound of the glass singing under the cloth was high and sharp. I ran my hand over the linens Clara wanted. They were heavy, cool to the touch. "She wants the crystal chandeliers too," Elise said. 5 of them. "Put it on the invoice," I said. "But put my name on the liability clause. If they break, I deal with it, not Clara." Elise looked at me with new interest. "You're handling everything." "I'm handling the payment," I corrected. "Clara handles the dream." I signed the papers on an antique table in the foyer. The pen was heavy brass. I pressed down hard, watching the ink bleed slightly into the paper. I was buying this. I was buying the crystal, the silk, the view of the ocean. I was buying the look on my mother's face when she told her friends her daughter was getting married at the Aveline. I was buying the illusion that we were a normal, happy family. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I finished the signature, Janet R. Moore, and capped the pen. I walked out to the terrace to check the message. The wind was picking up, whipping my hair across my face. The text was from a number I hadn't saved, but I knew the area code. Ethan Cole. "Heard you're in town. Saw the wedding announcement. Are you surviving it?" I stared at the screen. Ethan. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since he moved to Chicago to run his family's logistics firm. But before that, we had a history that was quiet and deep. In middle school, when the other kids called me Captain Hook or the Claw, and my sister pretended she didn't know me, Ethan had sat at my table. He didn't ask about the arm. He asked about my math homework. He shared his fries. He treated me like a person, not a project or a punchline. I didn't tell him about the money. I didn't tell him about the ache in my chest that wouldn't go away no matter how many checks I wrote. I kept it tight. Janet surviving. It's a production. You know how they are. Ethan, I know how they are. I'm here for meetings, staying at the Breathless downtown. If you need an escape hatch, let me know. I didn't reply immediately. I looked out at the ocean. The waves were crashing against the rocks below, a violent rhythmic pounding. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had the controls. I had the receipts. I had the invoices. I had structured this wedding like a building project. I had calculated the loads. I thought I had accounted for all the variables. I put the phone away. I walked back inside to pay the florist. The smell of the flowers was overwhelming, sweet and cloying like a funeral parlor in August. I handed over my credit card. The florist, a woman with manicured nails and a fake smile, took it. "You're such a good sister," she said, "doing all this." "Yes," I said. "I am." I drove home in the dark. The road was winding, narrow, hugging the cliffs. I drove with one hand on the wheel, my left hand steering with the precision of habit. My right arm rested in my lap. I thought about the $120,000. I thought about Ethan being in town. I thought about my mother's voice saying, "We're so proud of you." I pulled into my parking spot at the apartment complex. The engine ticked as it cooled. I checked the banking app again. The balance was lower. The wedding account was active. The trap was set, though I didn't know yet that I was the one inside it. I thought I was the architect. I didn't realize I was just the mortar meant to hold the bricks together and then be covered up. I went upstairs, made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat in the dark listening to the city breathe. I had work to do. There were contracts to review for the caterer. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in a blue wash. I started reading the fine print. I always read the fine print. It's where the truth hides. The cruelty didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in like water, finding a hairline fracture in concrete. It started at the final dress fitting 3 weeks before the wedding. I was there to write the check for the alterations, sitting in a velvet chair, while Clara stood on the pedestal surrounded by mirrors and 3 bridesmaids. They were drinking champagne that I had paid for. One of the bridesmaids, a girl named Sarah, who had never looked me in the eye, was telling a story about a creepy guy at a bar. She mimicked his approach, tucking her arm up against her side and dragging her foot. "He came at me like this," she laughed. "Like a broken toy." The room erupted. Clara laughed the loudest. She threw her head back, her neck long and white. Then she saw me in the mirror. She didn't stop laughing, she just adjusted the pitch. "Oh, stop it, Sarah," Clara said, wiping a tear from her eye. "You're terrible. Janet knows you don't mean her. Besides, Janet is tough. She can take a joke." My mother, fussing with Clara's train, chimed in without looking up. "At least Clara got the good genes. Imagine if this dress had to be altered for, well, structural issues." I sat very still. I put my coffee cup down on the side table. I counted the beats of my heart. 1, 2, 3. I didn't say anything. I opened my bag, took out the folder for the photographer, and focused on the shot list. Work is safer than feeling. If I felt it, I would have to scream, and screaming doesn't pay invoices. I focused on the task: ceremony 4:00 p.m. First look 2:30 p.m. I drew a straight line through an unnecessary expense on the list. The ink was black and permanent. The financial pressure tightened the next week. The love-bombing phase was over. We were in the extraction phase. It was subtle at first. A text from Clara. "The florist says we need more hydrangeas for the arch. It's looking thin." Then a call from my father. "The band needs a rider added. Just standard stuff. Take care of it." Then came the caviar bar. It was a late edition requested 5 days before the final head count. $4,000. "We can't do it," I said. We were at the venue for a walkthrough. "The budget is maxed out." The air in the room changed instantly. My mother's smile vanished. "Maxed out." "But Janet, it's a celebration. Don't be stingy. It's not becoming." "It's not stinginess," I said. "It's math." Clara sighed, a heavy, tragic sound. "I just wanted it to be perfect. I thought you wanted that too. I thought you were happy to help." The implication was clear. Pay or we stop pretending to like you. I looked at them. They were waiting. The warmth was being held hostage, ransom set at $4,000. "Fine," I said. "I'll approve the addendum." The smiles returned. The sun came back out. But I didn't write the check as a gift this time. I went to the venue office. I sat down with the manager. "Update the contract," I said. Add the caviar service. But I want a separate invoice for it timestamped today, and I want the receipt emailed to me immediately. I was logging it. Every dime. I wasn't paying for a wedding anymore. I was building a case file. The breaking point happened 2 days later. I was at my parents' house to drop off the favor boxes, 200 of them, that I had assembled alone in my apartment until my fingers bled. I walked in through the back door, the laundry room entrance. The house was quiet, but voices drifted from the dining room. I stopped. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I just heard my name. "She's exhausting," my sister said. Her voice was muffled but distinct. "She acts like she's the CEO of my wedding just because she signed a few checks." "Let her have her moment," my father said. I heard the clink of ice in a glass. "She's paying for the privilege. God knows she doesn't have anything else to spend it on. No husband, no kids, just that bank account." "It's creepy," Clara said. "The way she watches me. Like she thinks buying the flowers makes her part of the marriage. I just need her to sign the final vendor payments and then stay out of the photos. Can you imagine the arm in the official portraits? It ruins the symmetry." "Don't worry," my mother said. "We'll put her on the end. We can crop her out for the mantle version." "She'll pay, though?" Clara asked. "The final balance is due on the wedding night." "She'll pay," my father said. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "She always pays. It's the only way she knows how to get us to look at her." I stood in the laundry room. The smell of detergent and dryer lint was thick in the air. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Not a little trembling, but a violent vibration. I was holding a coffee traveler mug. My grip failed. It slipped from my left hand and hit the tile floor. The sound was like a gunshot. The lid popped off. Brown liquid splashed across my shoes and the white baseboards. The voices in the dining room stopped. I didn't freeze. I didn't run in there and scream. I knelt down. I grabbed a roll of paper towels from the shelf. I wiped up the coffee. My movements were mechanical. Wipe, fold, wipe, fold. I cleaned the floor until it was dry. I put the mug back in my bag. Then I turned around and walked out the back door, closing it silently behind me. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. I didn't cry. Crying implies surprise. Crying implies betrayal. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a clarification. I had been buying a product that didn't exist. They weren't my family. They were a business, and I was a customer they despised. I drove home. I walked into my apartment and went straight to my desk. I opened the wedding spreadsheet. I stopped looking at it as a budget and started looking at it as evidence. I gathered the contracts, the venue rental, the catering agreement, the floral deposit, the band booking. Every single document had one name on the responsible party line, Janet R. Moore. I pulled up the payment schedule. The final bulk payments, roughly $40,000, were scheduled to autodraft from the wedding account at 10:00 p.m. on the night of the wedding. I canceled the autodrafts. I didn't cancel the checks. I just turned off the automation. I wanted to be the one to push the button, or not push it. I printed everything. Correspondence invoices, the text messages where Clara begged for money, the emails where my father promised repayment when the market turns. I put them in a slim leather folder. I told myself I will not be confused about what happened. The rehearsal dinner was the next night. It was held at a seafood restaurant on the wharf. The air was salty and cold. I wore a navy dress with long sleeves. I walked in and saw them, my mother, my father, Clara. They waved. They smiled. The masks were back on. "Janet," my mother cried. "There you are. We missed you yesterday." "I was busy," I said. My voice was flat. I went to the bar. I ordered a club soda. I felt a presence beside me. It wasn't one of the groomsmen who had been avoiding me like I was contagious. It was Ethan. He looked older than I remembered, but the eyes were the same, dark, observant, calm. He wore a gray suit, no tie. He didn't look like he was trying to impress anyone, which meant he was the most impressive man in the room. "You look like you're planning a murder," he said quietly. He was looking at the mirror behind the bar, watching the reflection of the room. "Just an audit," I said. He turned to face me. He didn't glance at my arm. He looked right at me. I heard some talk at the hotel about the generous sister. You're funding this circus. Most of it, I said. And they treat you like staff, he observed. It wasn't a question. I took a sip of the soda. The bubbles burned my throat. Worse, I said. Staff get paid. I'm paying them. I looked at the table where my family sat. They were laughing. Clara was holding court. My father was pouring wine. I heard them, I told Ethan. I kept my voice low. Yesterday. They didn't know I was there. They talked about cropping me out of the photos. They said I only pay because I have nothing else. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, "Oh, that's terrible." He set his glass down. "That's a bad tactical error on their part," he said. "I have the contracts," I said. "I have the control." "So," Ethan asked, "what do you want to happen?" The question hung in the air. It was the first time in months anyone had asked me what I wanted. "I want them to know that I know," I said. "I don't want to burn the building down. I just want to stop paying for the fuel." "Then don't pay," Ethan said. "Let it run out." "It runs out tomorrow night," I said. We stood there for a moment in silence. It wasn't romantic. It was an alliance. I felt my shoulders drop an inch. I wasn't alone. I had a witness. The rest of the night was a masterclass in degradation disguised as logistics. My mother found me 10 minutes later. "Janet, darling, we have a little problem," she said. "The coordinator needs someone to help move the gift bags from the hotel to the venue tomorrow morning. And someone needs to check the place settings. Clara is going to be in hair and makeup, and the bridesmaids are, well, they're busy." "I'll do it," I said. "And," she added, lowering her voice, "we put you at table 9 for the reception. It's near the kitchen, but we thought it would be better. More room for you to maneuver, you know." Table 9. The overflow table. The one furthest from the head table. "Perfect," I said. "Oh, and for the speeches," my father leaned in smiling. "We're doing a little roast, just family fun. We found some old home videos. The one where you tried to learn to ride a bike. It's hilarious. Just be a good sport, okay?" I knew the video. I was 7. I couldn't grip the handlebar properly. I fell. I cried. My father had kept filming, laughing from behind the camera. They were going to play it on a 20-foot screen while people ate filet mignon. "I'll be a good sport," I said. I looked across the room at Ethan. He raised his glass slightly. "I let them position me. I let them assign me the manual labor. I let them put me at the back table. I let them load the gun. They thought they were pointing it at me. They didn't understand how ballistics worked. They didn't understand that the person holding the checkbook is the one holding the trigger." I went back to my hotel room early. I laid out my clothes for the wedding. I took the folder of invoices out of my bag and placed it on the desk. I checked the banking app one last time. The balance was there, waiting. I slept soundly. It was the sleep of the executioner the night before the hangman does his job, no malice. Just duty. The bill was coming due. The ceremony was a masterpiece of engineering. The arch was covered in white hydrangeas that I had paid for 3 days ago. The string quartet played Vivaldi with a precision that cost $1,200 an hour. I sat in the second row watching the back of my sister's dress. It was French lace. I knew the thread count. I knew the import tax. I watched the guests. They were wiping their eyes. They saw a fairy tale. I saw a spreadsheet. I saw a line item for chair rentals mahogany. I saw a line item for officiant honorarium. I felt a strange duality. I was proud of the work. I had built this. I had shored up the foundation and painted the walls. But underneath the pride was a nausea that felt like swallowing wet cement. It was the sickness of knowing the structure was condemned. The vows were exchanged. Clara promised to love and honor. Her voice broke perfectly on the word forever. My mother squeezed my father's hand. He looked stoic, the patriarch of a successful dynasty. It was a good performance. I clapped when required, I stood when required. My face was a mask of plaster. We moved to the reception tent. It was a cathedral of silk and light. The 5 crystal chandeliers hung overhead, refracting the sunset into 1,000 rainbows. I walked to table 9. It was exactly where they said it would be, next to the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter came out with a tray of appetizers, a blast of hot air and the smell of roasting garlic hit me. I sat down. The other guests at the table were 2 distant cousins who hadn't been seen since a funeral in 2010, and a frantic couple who had been added to the list yesterday. They looked at me with confusion. I was the maid of honor sitting by the kitchen. "Is this right?" the cousin asked, pointing to my place card. "Yes," I said. "It's where I fit." The dinner service began. The wine flowed. It was a Cabernet from the vineyard's reserve list. $80 a bottle. I watched my father at the head table. He was drinking fast. His face was flushing. Then came the tapping of the spoon against the glass. The sound cut through the chatter. The room hushed. My father stood up. He held the microphone loosely. He loved a microphone. "Welcome," he boomed. "Welcome to the happiest day of my life." He spoke about Clara. He called her a light. He called her a princess. Then he pivoted. He looked out into the gloom of the tent, searching for table 9. "And we have to mention Janet," he said. "Where are you, Janet?" A spotlight swept the room and found me. I didn't blink. The light was hot. "There she is," he laughed. "You know, raising Janet was always an adventure. She needed a little extra help, a little extra patience." He mimed a handicap with his hand, a vague, flapping gesture. "We never knew what her life would look like. We worried she'd be alone, but look at her. She found a way to be useful." The room rippled with polite, uncertain laughter. "She really stepped up," he continued. "It's amazing what people can do when they want to be part of something normal." He raised his glass. "To Janet, our little helper." He sat down. I stared at my fork. It was heavy silver. I looked at the condensation sweating down the side of my water glass. I didn't feel anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. It was the absolute zero of space. Then Clara stood up. She looked ethereal. She took the mic. "I just want to echo Dad," she said. Her voice was sweet, laced with arsenic. "Janet, thank you. Thank you for everything you contributed. We know it was a lot. But let's be honest, it's not like you had anything else to spend it on." She paused for the laugh. It came louder this time. The guests had permission now. It was a roast. "At least your money finally bought you a party," she said. "Even if it's my party." She smiled. It was the smile of a predator who thinks the cage door is locked. The band leader hesitated. He was about to cue the music. I stood up. I didn't rush. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the wooden floor. It was a harsh sound. I walked out of the spotlight toward the head table. I didn't have a microphone. I didn't need one. I have a voice trained on construction sites, used to cutting through the noise of pile drivers and diesel engines. I stopped 10 feet from the head table. The room went silent. The band stopped playing. "Thank you, Clara," I said. My voice was level. "And thank you, Dad." I looked at the guests. I saw Ethan in the back, leaning against a support pole. He was watching me. He was still. "I want to take a moment to thank the staff," I said, gesturing to the waiters frozen by the kitchen doors. "They have been working since 500 a.m. They deserve your respect." I turned back to my family. They looked confused. My mother was clutching her pearls. Clara looked annoyed. "I also want to clarify the contributions you mentioned," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. It was slim black leather. I opened it. "I funded the venue deposit $30,000, I said. I let the paper drop to the floor. "I paid the wedding planner $12,000. Another paper dropped. "I covered the floral installation $18,000. Drop. "The band, the catering, the lighting, the dress you are wearing." I dropped the papers one by one. They scattered on the floor like dead leaves. I have paid out $82,000 to date, I said. Because I was told this was about family. Because I was told that if I paid, I belonged. The silence in the tent was heavy. You could hear the canvas snapping in the wind outside. But tonight, I said, I learned that I was just the bank. And a joke. I looked at my father. His face was purple. Janet, he hissed. Sit down, you're embarrassing us. I'm not done, I said. I held up my phone. The screen was bright in the dim light. The remaining balance is $38,000, I said. It is scheduled to be paid to the vendors at 10:00 p.m. tonight, from the account that I control. Clara's eyes went wide. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:45 p.m. I have canceled the transfer, I said. A gasp went through the room. It wasn't theatrical. It was the sound of people doing math. The checks will bounce, I said clearly. The final payments will not be made, not by me. You can't do that, my mother shrieked. She stood up, knocking over her wine glass. Red stains spread across the white tablecloth like blood. How could you do this to your sister? You did this, I said. You were never kind. You were temporarily polite because you needed the check to clear. You're bitter, Clara screamed. She wasn't the princess anymore. Her face was twisted. You're jealous and you're broken and no one wants you. Maybe, I said. But I'm rich, and you're not. My father stood up. He looked like he was going to come over the table. You ungrateful. Excuse me. The voice came from the back of the room. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Ethan Cole walked forward. He moved through the tables with an easy, terrifying grace. He didn't look at my family. He walked until he was standing next to me. He didn't touch me. He just stood there. A wall. I don't think we've been properly introduced to everyone, Ethan said. He looked at my father. I'm Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Logistics. My father's face went from purple to gray. He knew the name. Cole Logistics was the primary distributor for my father's manufacturing business. They represented 40% of his revenue. Ethan, my father stammered. This is a family dispute. It's not. I'm here as a guest, Ethan said calmly. But I'm observing as a CEO, and my company has a strict code of conduct regarding reputation and ethics. He looked at Clara, then at my mother, then back at my father. We don't partner with people who abuse their leverage, Ethan said. Public humiliation of a business partner, and Janet is a partner. She's the financier, is a liability. Ethan, please, my father said. His voice was shaking. I'm pausing our contract renewal discussions effective immediately, Ethan said. I'll have my legal team review the morality clause in our current agreement on Monday. I will not put my company's name next to cruelty dressed up as family values. The room was absolutely silent. The air had been sucked out of the tent. This wasn't a wedding drama anymore. This was a demolition. I looked at Ethan. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The floor was mine. I turned back to them. I felt light. The weight I had been carrying for 30 years, the need to please, the need to buy love, was gone. I had dropped it on the floor with the invoices. The staff will be paid, I said. I will write personal checks to the servers and the crew tomorrow. I won't punish workers for your behavior. I looked at Clara. She was crying now, real ugly tears ruining her makeup. But I will not fund your image, I said. Figure it out. I turned around. I didn't look back. I walked down the center aisle past the staring guests, past the cousins, past the table where I had been assigned to sit by the kitchen. I could feel their eyes on my back, on my arm, on my dress. It didn't matter. I pushed through the tent flaps into the cool night air. The ocean roared below. The stars were sharp and clear. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't stop. Janet. It was Ethan. He fell into step beside me. He didn't try to steer me. He didn't try to hold my hand. He just walked. You okay? he asked. I don't know, I said. My hands were finally steady. I think I just cost my father his business. He cost himself his business, Ethan said. You just turned on the lights. We walked toward the parking lot. The music from the tent had not restarted. Behind us in the distance, I heard shouting. It sounded small against the noise of the ocean. Where are you going? Ethan asked. Home, I said. I have a bottle of wine that I bought for myself. It cost $12. I'm going to drink it. Sounds like a plan, Ethan said. Mind if I drive behind you just to make sure the road is clear? I can drive, I said. I know you can, he said. I just want to go the same way. I unlocked my car. I got in. I looked at the venue one last time. It was glowing on the hill, a beautiful, expensive lie. I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't check the rearview mirror. The fallout wasn't a crash. It was a siege. I woke up the next morning in my own bed in my quiet apartment to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. It wasn't ringing. It was seizing. A continuous angry buzz that rattled the glass of water next to it. I didn't pick it up. I made coffee. I stood by the window and watched the city wake up below me. The sky was gray, the kind of flat industrial slate that promises rain but never delivers. I felt surprisingly hollow. Not empty, just cleared out. Like a room after the furniture has been repossessed. When I finally looked at the screen, there were 47 missed calls. 14 from my mother, 12 from my father, 21 from Clara. The text messages were a scrolling feed of panic and rage. Clara. You ruined everything. I hope you're happy. Mother. Pick up the phone. Now. Your father is having chest pains. Father. We need to talk about the wire transfer. The caterer is threatening to call the police. The police wouldn't come for a civil contract dispute, but the caterer was smart. He knew fear was a better motivator than the law. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't reply to my family. I drafted emails to the vendors. I had the list. To the florist, the band, the rental company, and the catering manager. Subject, payment, responsibility, to whom it may concern. As stated last night, I have terminated my financial involvement with the event dated yesterday. The remaining balances are the responsibility of the hosts, Mr. and Mrs. Moore. I have attached the original correspondence where they assumed liability for overages. Please direct all invoicing to them. I hit send. It was a cold move. It was also the only way to ensure I wasn't liable for the $38,000 I had blocked. Ethan called at noon. I picked up on the first ring. How's the bunker? He asked. His voice was clear, lacking the static of hysteria that defined my family's communication style. Loud, I said. They're panicking. They should be, Ethan said. I had my legal counsel send a notice to your father's office this morning. We're formally auditing the supply chain ethics. It freezes our contract renewal for 90 days. He knows what that means. It means he can't get a loan, I said. My father ran his business on credit lines that depended on the coal logistics contract. Exactly, Ethan said. He's not thinking about you right now. He's thinking about bankruptcy. It buys you breathing room. Use it. I need to see them, I said. One time, to close the books. Don't go to the house, he advised. Neutral ground, somewhere public, somewhere they can't scream. The lobby of the Hyatt, I said. Downtown. I'll be in the bar, Ethan said. I won't come over unless you wave, but I'll be there. You don't have to protect me, I said. I know, he replied. I just want to drink their coffee. I sent the text. Lobby of the Hyatt, 4:00 p.m. If you want to discuss the invoices, meet me there. If you yell, I leave. They were 10 minutes early. I watched them from the mezzanine before I went down. They looked smaller. My father, usually a man who filled a room with his shoulders, and his voice looked shrunken in his blazer. My mother was wearing sunglasses indoors. Clara wasn't there. Presumably she was somewhere mourning the loss of her social standing. I walked down the stairs. My right arm hung at my side. I didn't hide it. I wore a short-sleeved blouse. I sat opposite them in two low leather chairs. The lobby echoed with the sound of rolling suitcases and concierge phones. "Janet," my mother started. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red. "How could you? The humiliation. People are talking. Everyone is talking." "Let them talk," I said. "Facts are facts." "You destroyed your sister's wedding," my father said. His voice was a low growl, but it lacked teeth. He looked tired. "Do you have any idea what you've done to the business?" Ethan Cole sent a letter. A formal letter. "I know," I said. "Actions have consequences. You taught me that." "It was a roast," he said. He leaned forward trying to intimidate me, but the distance between the chairs was too great. "It was a joke. We were just having fun. You're so sensitive. You always have been." "No," I said. "A joke is when everyone laughs. Bullying is when everyone laughs but one person. Exploitation is when you make that person pay for the microphone you use to mock them." I pulled a document from my bag. It wasn't an invoice this time. It was a promissory note. "3 months ago," I said, "when you asked for the initial deposit, you sent me an email stating you would pay me back when the liquidity issues resolved. That constitutes a debt." I slid the paper across the table. "I'm not asking for the money back," I said. My father blinked. He looked at the paper, then at me. Hope flared in his eyes. He thought I was folding. He thought I was coming back to the herd. "I'm writing it off," I said, "as a loss, a bad investment. But in exchange, I want silence." "What?" my mother asked. "I don't want you to contact me," I said. "I don't want you to come to my apartment. I don't want you to call my office. If you do, I will file a small claims suit for the $82,000, and I will subpoena the wedding video as evidence of emotional distress and verbal abuse, and I will send that video to every board member of every charity you sit on." My mother gasped. "You wouldn't." "I paid for the video," I said. "I own the copyright to the raw footage. I checked the contract." My father looked at me with something that wasn't love or even anger. It was recognition. He was a businessman, and he finally realized he was sitting across from another professional. He realized he had underestimated the quiet girl with the deformed arm. He had thought I was weak because I was kind. He didn't understand that kindness is a choice and choices can be revoked. "Fine," he said. He didn't look at my mother. "Fine." "Good," I said. "The caterer is expecting a cashier's check by 5. I'd hurry." I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. There was no point. The transaction was complete. I walked over to the bar. Ethan was sitting at a high-top table reading a newspaper on a tablet. He looked up as I approached. "Done?" he asked. "Done," I said. "How did it go?" "They tried to bargain," I said. "Then they tried to bully. Then they realized I had the leverage." "And the business?" "I told them to pay the vendors or I'd sue," I said. "I think Dad is going to liquidate some stocks. He hates doing that." "Better than a lawsuit," Ethan said. "And better than losing the coal contract permanently. If he pays the workers, I might reconsider the review in a few months, for the workers' sake, not his." "That's your call," I said. "I'm out." My phone buzzed again. I flinched, expecting another wave of hate. I pulled it out. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but the context made it clear. Unknown. "Hey, Janet. It's Cousin Mark. I was at table 9. Just wanted to say, that took guts. And you were right. They've always been assholes. Let me know if you want to grab a beer sometime." No family allowed. I stared at the screen. Mark. The one who used to let me win at Mario Kart when we were 10. I hadn't thought about him in years. Then another text, this one from the venue coordinator, Elise. "Elise. Hi, Janet. Just wanted to say thank you for the check for the staff tips. You didn't have to do that. The crew says you're the only class act in that whole family. Good luck." I felt a tightness in my throat, but it wasn't the old pain. It was relief. The world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. I had set a boundary, and the people who mattered, the decent people, didn't hate me for it. They respected it. "You smiling?" Ethan asked. "A little," I said. "My cousin wants to get a beer." "Good," Ethan said. "You need a better class of relative." He stood up and put his tablet away. "I have a flight back to Chicago tomorrow night, but I'm free for dinner, unless you're busy auditing more family members." "No audits," I said. "I'm retired from the family business." "Then let's eat," he said. "Somewhere cheap, somewhere with paper napkins." We walked out of the hotel. The sun had come out, breaking through the gray slate. The light hit the pavement, making the wet concrete shine. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. My arm felt lighter. The phantom weight of their expectations was gone. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I wasn't the bank. I was just Janet. And for the first time in 30 years, that was enough. We walked down the street, two people moving through the city, untethered. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew what wouldn't happen. I wouldn't be buying anyone's love ever again. The price was too high, and the return on investment was zero. I looked at my reflection in a shop window as we passed. I saw a woman in a sharp blazer walking with a man who respected her. I saw the arm shorter than the other tucked against her side. It was just a limb. It wasn't a tragedy. "Italian or Thai?" Ethan asked. "Thai," I said. "Spicy." "Brave," he said. "Always," I replied. And I meant it. The silence in my apartment was different now. Before the wedding, the silence had felt like a vacuum, a space waiting to be filled by people who didn't want to be there. Now it felt like oxygen. I woke up on Monday morning at 6:00 a.m. The light coming through the blinds was gray and steady. I didn't check my phone immediately. When I finally did, I went to the settings menu. I blocked my mother's number, then my father's, then Clara's. It wasn't an act of aggression, it was an act of hygiene. You don't leave the windows open when the air outside is toxic. I went to work. The job site was loud, smelling of wet concrete and diesel. I put on my hard hat and walked the perimeter of the bridge piling we were reinforcing. My foreman, a man named Miller, who had never once asked me about my arm in 5 years, nodded at me. "Structure looks good, Janet," he said. "Load tests came back clean." "Good," I said. "Pour the concrete." It was simple. Physics is honest. If you put too much weight on a weak column, it breaks. If you build it right, it stands. My family was a weak column. I had stopped trying to prop them up. At lunch, I went to the bank. I sat in the cubicle with a personal banker who smelled of vanilla hand sanitizer. "I need to close an account," I said. "The one labeled wedding?" she asked, looking at her screen. "Yes. There's a remaining balance of $12.40. "Keep it," I said. "Just close it." She typed for a moment, the keys clicking softly. "It's done. Would you like a receipt?" "Yes," I said. "I always keep the receipts." I took the paper slip. When I got home that evening, I didn't burn the evidence. That's what people do in movies. In real life, you file it. I took the black leather folder containing the contracts, the invoices, the promissory note, and the nasty emails. I put the bank closing receipt on top. I placed the folder in my filing cabinet in the back behind my tax returns. I didn't need to look at it every day, but I needed to know it was there. It was my proof. If I ever started to doubt myself, if the old voice in my head ever whispered that maybe I was the problem, I could open that drawer. The ink wouldn't change. The numbers wouldn't lie. The past was not up for debate. It was recorded. Ethan stayed in town for 2 more days. We didn't do anything grand. We didn't go to 5-star restaurants or walk on the beach at sunset. We ordered takeout and sat on my balcony watching the traffic on the highway. He was drinking a beer. I was drinking water. "I have to go back to Chicago tomorrow," he said. "Logistics wait for no man." "I know," I said. "I have a site inspection on Thursday." He looked at me. The air between us was comfortable. It lacked the frantic energy of courtship. It was the steady hum of recognition. "You could come to Chicago," he said. "Not to move, just to visit. We have bridges there, nice ones." "I might," I said. "I have vacation days I never use." "Use them," he said. He set his beer down on the railing. He looked at my right arm resting on the table. He didn't look away. "You know why I sat with you in middle school?" he asked. "Because you were nice," I said. "No," he said. "Because you were interesting. Everyone else was trying so hard to be the same. You were different, and you were tough. I liked you then. I like you now." It wasn't poetry. It was better. It was a fact. He didn't want to save me. He knew I had already saved myself. He just wanted to know me. "I like you too," I said. He left the next morning. We didn't kiss. He hugged me, a solid two-armed hug that felt like a brace against the wind. Then he got in his rental car and drove to the airport. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt seen. 2 weeks later, I hosted a dinner. It was small. Just Cousin Mark, who brought a 6-pack of craft beer and a genuine smile, and Elise, the wedding planner. She had called me to say she had fired the Moores as clients after the check bounced and wanted to buy me a drink, so I invited her over instead. And Miller, my foreman, who came because I promised him my brisket recipe. The table was set simply. White plates, linen napkins, no crystal, no centerpieces, just food and people. We ate, we talked. Mark told a story about my father trying to fix a lawnmower in 1998 and setting his pants on fire. We laughed. It wasn't the polite, terrified laughter of the wedding reception. It was deep, belly-shaking laughter. I reached for the salt. My right arm extended across the table. The sleeve of my sweater was pulled up. The taper of the limb was visible. No one flinched. No one looked down. Miller passed me the salt. "Thanks," I said. "Pass the brisket," Mark said. "Seriously, Janet, this is professional grade." "I followed the instructions," I said. I looked around the table. My apartment was warm. The light was golden. My phone was in the other room, silent. Somewhere in a big house on a hill, my family was likely spinning a new narrative, painting themselves as victims, rewriting history to explain why the money stopped. Let them. They could build whatever story they wanted. I knew the structural integrity of their lies. They would collapse eventually. I took a sip of wine. It was a $20 bottle, and it tasted better than the $80 Cabernet at the Aveline estate. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I wasn't the bank. I wasn't the broken daughter paying a toll to travel on the family road. I was Janet. I was an engineer. I was a woman who paid her debts and kept her receipts. I looked at my guests. "Who wants dessert?" I asked. "I bought it. I didn't make it." "I'm in," Elise said. "Me too," Miller said. I stood up to clear the plates. I moved efficiently, stacking the china. I felt the floor solid beneath my feet. I felt the space in my chest where the anxiety used to be. It was wide and open and quiet. I walked into the kitchen. I caught my reflection in the dark window above the sink. I looked tired, but my eyes were clear. I looked like someone I could trust. I turned back to the living room, to the noise of my friends, to the life I had paid for with my own sweat and my own choices. The world hadn't ended because I said no. It had just gotten honest. And honesty, I realized, was the only luxury worth paying for. And that is where Janet finally found her peace, realizing that the only structure worth building was the one she designed for herself. If you are nodding along to Janet's journey of quiet strength, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. We read every single comment of your thoughts below. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.